Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really glad that I can now see the, the slides on this. I was thinking about next generations. If I start to sneeze, that's because my grandson at age 3, and those of you that have 3-year-olds know they are a walking germ, and so I have that. He was also named Hurricane by his neighbors at age 2, which gives you a feel. My granddaughter is 6, and I will tell you a quick story based on what was just said. She called her mother in a panic to come and fix the TV. She was watching the television set. And her mom got up there and realized what she was seeing for the first time was an advertisement. Everything had been streaming until that time. There was no world of advertisements to her, which gives you a feel for those of us that aren't there of the entire different generation and their experiences that are coming. I do want to talk about it a bit broader. This will be a little bit pointy head, and I think you'll have to dim the lights a little bit to see some of these slides. I also want to tell you that I'm speaking for two. My co-author of the book Reset, Business and Society in the New Social Landscape, published by Columbia University Press, is with Darden Business School, James Rubin. He was my partner for a decade as we worked at Darden on a whole new theory of business, which I'll talk about today. If you are interested, there's more information on the book, but I promise this isn't a sales pitch. It's more to talk about what is this new landscape if you're going to do business? What is the landscape you're in? So let me bore you a little bit with data. First of all, I think it's tempting to think that you are in a whole new, social media is everything, and it's not. You've got a reset that has many different functions to it. First of all, there's a radical transparency. People that are coming forward to tell their very personal stories of a Me Too moment when they haven't even told their family yet. Tells you are now in an era of radical transparency. In addition to that, you have collapsed barriers. And this is, by the way, this is like the Cliff Notes version of what's in this book. Collapsed barriers. Today, we used to know what a fact was. Today, not so much. It's kind of like the loudest voice in the hallway wins. We used to know who a journalist was. There are only a few of them. There were 3 major broadcast televisions. Today, Huffington Post won a Pulitzer. No one would have thought of that before. They're a media. And frankly, a well-followed social media person is really a journalist in this world. So you've got very collapsed barriers that didn't exist before. In addition to that, you've got a whole new cultural ecosystem. What you used to have was you had boundaries of time or boundaries of geography of who was your community. That's no longer the case. That gives you a whole different ecosystem. You have a very polarized environment where people can, in fact, social media tends to build polarization, which the last group just talked about that. And you've got in this whole new ecosystem, governments around the world that have become increasingly ineffectual. Gridlock isn't just a function of the United States. It is a function globally. So you've got a void right now in the very people who you thought were doing the common good being less and less able. The implications for business, which is, let me see, I just moved too far. I'm not sure what that is. These slides aren't showing up, so I'm not quite sure what happened. Let me go back and see. I'm going to have to do bird imitations here. Okay, well, unfortunately, they didn't come through. There's implications for business about those 3 circles. For radical transparency, what that means is you now have web-enabled auditors of the company who are on beat 24/7. They're constantly there. For the issue of a power shift, I spent 35 years in corporate. I ran global communications for companies. In the 1990s, I could decide, in fact, I was at Dow Corning, we launched a corporate positioning, and we launched in 2 pilot areas, mainland China, and in addition to that, Germany, to test some things out. I could decide what ads ran where. I could pick where the ads appeared. I controlled the message. I controlled the whole narrative. Today, the control of the narrative has shifted to those outside auditors. They are now empowered, in addition to being 24/7 auditors, they're empowered with a communication platform that has no boundaries of time and no boundaries of geography. They will shape the story for you. And as a result, increasingly, businesses are needing to go out and not say, this is the message I want to push, because very often that's virtually impossible. Look to find out what's already being said and link your message to what's being said and have a collaborative message going forward because it's already being talked about. So it's changed the dimension. Some of the data behind this, which I'm really disappointed we can't see, but we can provide the overheads to you later on. Global research. APCO Worldwide, at which I'm also a senior counselor, did research in the 14 largest economies of the world in 2014. It's hard to get 94% of people to agree on anything. But today, 94% say companies have the ability to shape a better society. That's 94%, which is a pretty amazing number. 87% of those said companies today exist to create value for the multiple interests of stakeholders. In other words, more than just profit. We recently did a study in the US on talking about hyper-aware consumers. 93% said the best companies to work for do good for both themselves and society, and that companies should support social issues. So the question about what should CEOs do and what stand they take, there's an expectation. There's a lot of information out there about the growing degradation of trust for business. And I tend to be fairly cynical of that because I kind of grew up during Watergate. And trust imploded during Watergate and really hasn't come back. What's new are these expectations I just told you about. The gap between trust and growing expectations of business, that's what's new. And the fact of the matter is, companies are being focused on not just the products and the services they offer, but people want to know about the company behind the products and services. They want to know the integrity of your actions. Pledges made are not an action. Behavior and how you act is the testimony to your corporate character. And people are looking at that. In fact, in the research, global research that APCO did, they asked people, what will you do if you go to research companies? What actions will you take? The most compelling and frequently cited action, and this was on a global basis, was we would tell your friends about it to whether to go to work for that company. And that's a really big deal because another slide that I can't show you right now, let's talk about the next cultural change. Today we are experiencing a complete generational changeover of the workforce in the companies. Today, baby boomers retire at the rate of 10,000 a day. And that's going to happen for the next 18 years because that's the length of time of that generation. They're already being replaced by millennials who are generally in the frame of 1981, born in 1981 to 1996. And behind them are what is called Generation Zs, those people born after 1996. Their attitudes are vastly different. Their expectations of who they're going to work for is very different. But the other thing, in the Deloitte survey of millennials and next gens say, they aren't going to stick around. In Deloitte's 2018 research, millennials, 43% said they expected to leave their company within 2 years. Within Generation Z, they're younger, they can afford to move around. That was 62%. Those who intend to stay beyond 5 years, millennials, only 28%. So that says 70% of them are expecting to walk out the door after 5 years. Think of the institutional knowledge and the training and the investment that's happening from that churn. Generation Zs only expect to stick around for 12%. On the other hand, they're young, they can afford to move around. My main point is that when you see, as Dane introduced, the idea of whether CEOs should speak out, do they take a stand? Right now, the most consequential race, competitive race for corporations, is to recruit and retain the next generation workforce. That is as consequential as market share and market growth, because if you can't recruit and retain, then they will go to a competitor. I know a person who is a friend of mine who used to be, and he's moved on, but he was the chief public officer of Mars. Mars is privately owned. Mars has said that the reason they're taking on sustainability very seriously is they're tired of losing recruits to Unilever. That they're going to lose their chance to be competitive because they're not going to get the workforce they need. In addition to that generation, there is some new research again from Deloitte. What they said is, if you're not going to stick around, if you're thinking you're going to leave, what's going to drive your employee loyalty? The biggest reason employees said they would stay, for those who said they were going to stay, was that they work for a diverse organization. 69% said that was the thing that would determine whether they stay. 27% said they would leave if it was not with a diverse organization. They're trying to fix my slides, I can tell. 56% said that the diversity was with senior management, and maybe we have, or maybe there's two. You tell me when I think I can forward it. 56% says the diverse management team would be a factor. So notice it was not just the diverse management senior team. They want to work with colleagues that are diverse from themselves, and that is more likely for them to stick around. That's a very critical change of this next generation. That's why I led with my daughter called her mother up to say, fix the television because she didn't know what she was seeing. That life experience of this next replacement generation is amazingly different than the millennials, of which I am, that they're replacing. So all of that is driving CEOs to say, if I am going to recruit and retain this next generation, my company has to act better. That is one of the reasons for taking stands for, you recall the story of guns after Parkland, and the actions by Dick's Sporting Goods, or the actions by Delta and others. Part of that is to be able to recruit and retain the next generation. Can I try it? I could give it a try. There's some of the data. Yay! So I'm glad to be able to share these slides with you if you want to look at the data, but there is the 94% say that they're looking at the scrutiny of the corporate behavior, not just the products. 94% believe they have the ability to shape a better society, and the other numbers that I gave to you. In addition, they're looking at not just the company, the product, but the company behind it. Are they adding value? This second slide is, which of these companies would you admire more? A company that donates to charity, or a company that uses its business interests and expertise to address a social problem? That's a sea change in the relationship with the public. This is the next generation workforce that I told you about, the ability to stick around. They're not going to stick around much. And the importance, I'll just wait, the importance of diversity. All of this is talking about what we say in reset is the resetting of the sweet spot for a company. It used to be in business schools that if you were to find a business capability and a company need in that Venn diagram, you have a business. That is still true. But the companies that are going to succeed add this third circle, and that is through that expertise, they also meet a social need. That doesn't mean every company has to do that. What I'm talking about is, what does it take to navigate this new social landscape and succeed? Companies like to talk a lot in their narratives. That's getting back to the corporate narrative. It's very common for you want to naturally serve up the positive. What is it that you've done for shared solutions and contributing to society? The problem is the public doesn't evaluate your performance as though they have some new age spreadsheet, and they're going to figure out what you did that was good and what you did that was bad, and the net effect, I'll make a decision. It doesn't work that way. Instead, they look at the whole, and the importance of this diagram that I'll get to in a moment is that while you might want to begin in your narrative of what your shared solutions and shared advocacy, my counsel is first look inside. Look at where your own business operations are maybe doing some harm and make sure they're mitigated, and do that social risk management. The reason I say that is, she says hopefully, I'm sorry, okay. The headline up there, 70% of the headline producing crises are not caused by external factors. They're caused by things within management's decision or power. That is research that's been done by the Institute for Crisis Management for decades. And every year, it's 70+%. So if that's the case, should be easy, right? You should be able to fix it. Why don't you? One of the reasons is, and I've lived in corporate for 35 years, never underestimate the insulating power of corporate culture to lead to blind spots. It can never be underestimated. I had one Twitter post that I made one morning, and I saw at first maybe there were 300 shares, which is pretty big for me. I walked my dogs, and when I got back, it had been shared 7,000 times. What was it about? Do you recall the story about Under Armour, the underwear, the new age company, instituting a new policy, taking the bold stand that they will no longer reimburse expenses for strip clubs? Anybody see that one? That one was there. I must have been one of the first to post it, and all I said is, talk about a corporate blind spot. Yeah. They must not have seen that maybe that would be newsline worthy, or didn't see in advance that that practice probably wasn't something that they should do. So what James Rubin and I came up with, and is the focus of a lot of the book Reset, is the concept that we call inherent negatives. And I'll take you through this and then give some really tangible examples. An inherent negative is something that is embedded, that's why it's in the center of this bullseye. It's embedded in your business. And the more your business grows, the more you multiply your negatives. It might be at the heart of your business model. We were writing about Facebook's business model and the likelihood of it to cause polarization, and the very thing we are experiencing, that's in the book, and it was written in 2016. It was so obvious before the fact. Or it could be in some of your corporate policies, like reimbursing for strip clubs. Hopefully it's not that overt. It can also be part of business strategies and business life cycle, but the key is it's not just bad, it's that you grow when they're bad. In other words, you profit. The more money you are making, the more harm you are creating. That is why it's important to look first at your inherent negatives. So let's look at some. First of all, on company policies. In this new interconnected world, there's a whole new category of enterprise risk that most people are not paying attention to. I call it social risk. And that's more than diversity. That is, what is your track record on race and gender equity? A company as progressive as Nike found out that they had income disparity amongst their women executives, and they sent the letter to Mike Parker, and within a week, Parker acted on it. In addition to that, they had sexual harassment by some of their top executives, and within a week, something like 7 Nike executives were fired. That's because the women raised their hand. The company didn't see it. It was a blind spot. Race equity. If you recall the story of Starbucks and their policy on bathrooms, and how that then led to unconscious bias in who got to use the bathroom, who didn't, and that shut down Starbucks for I think about a week. Another example is full employment blowback. We all know, and we've now heard about Amazon and in New York. I was in New York when they announced it, and I knew what the fate of that was going to be. Just as every company has a carbon footprint, they have a social footprint. And you could see Amazon's social footprint in Seattle, and you know in advance what was going to happen in New York as well as in the DC area. The difference is they didn't do much to understand their own social footprint. They thought jobs would take care of it. Another category is sudden labor shortages, which are happening right now. Whole labor policies are changing, especially as you move more and more to the gig economy. We've talked about social media today, but look out for artificial intelligence and the inherent negatives and the problems that are going to be built into there. And this isn't going to be just based on tech companies. As the Internet of Things becomes part of everyday products, everyone is going to share in this, not to mention driverless cars. And then finally, where is the board of directors on this? If the company has blind spots, Boards of directors are just beginning to awake to a whole new category of risks that businesses face called social risk in an era of web-enabled auditors with collapsed boundaries and not being limited by time or geography. Business is up for some pretty interesting dimensions that are not going to change. So let's talk about, and I'll do this quickly so that I'm not running too late. Here's how can you understand, how can you become unblind? How can you begin to see your inherent negatives? What James and I have said is look at two things, your business life cycle, but then in the center of that circle, make sure you look at your business policy and your business model and your governance. So let's talk about raw, and this is raw materials. This is well outside the boundaries of what you do. If you're Kentucky Fried Chicken, you actually own the chickens that are made, but they're raised by farmers that you subcontract out. So you deliver the chicks to them, and they grow the chickens for you, and voila, you have food. But an inherent negative that they have, as well as other food, whether they're beef or pork, is the use of antibodies in the raising of those animals. And it's been pretty well shown that those antibodies, that then the reason they're there is in addition to the wellness of the animal, it goes beyond that because they produce bigger breasts. They produce more meat with less food. It's much more economical. The dilemma of that, and it's been pretty well shown, is that antibiotics in the food we consume is contributing to human resistance to antibiotics. The more they grow, the more the inherent negative impact is. Classic example of an inherent negative. UPS, which I mentioned is one of the stars of the book. The more UPS grows, the more grows its carbon footprint. And that is why UPS has been a pioneer in experiments on driving. They're an engineering company by culture, and so they know the logistics of how to ensure that they can reduce their carbon footprint while also growing. To date of their Orion program, they've reduced their carbon footprint by 100,000 metric tons a year, and that was the latest data I've looked at. So they've recognized, and the other thing about UPS, and the reason James and I did a case study of them, is that unlike FedEx, they are one company. They can decide how to deliver your package to you. They don't have to decide ground versus air versus whatever. They can mix and do the best way to get there from here, and they're able to control things like that. If you're Diageo, you don't have responsibility, you may think, for how people use your product. You're selling a legal product. But what if people use it irresponsibly, which they do? That is why Diageo has whole programs of a partnership with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They do training for bartenders. They go well beyond the four walls of their business because they know their business depends on this being correctly used. My favorite example these days is Juul. A lot of you of a certain age probably know about Juul, but that's the vaping product. Built by people from Stanford that in their master's thesis talked about creating a solution to help people wean from cigarettes. And so they produced Juul. One capsule of Juul has as much nicotine load as an entire pack of cigarettes. But if you're going to now build a product that will wean people, I smoked 30 years ago, I still remember the pain of quitting. It's a big deal. And if it didn't give me any of that nicotine load, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it. So it's a legitimate need. But they also did candy flavors on them. They also said you shouldn't be using Juul unless you were above a certain age. Yeah, but their growth, which has been explosive, has been on the shoulders of high school and junior high kids who are now getting addicted to nicotine. Do you think that's an inherent negative? The more you grow, the more the negative on it. And then finally, Patagonia, which is another favorite of mine. If you look at Patagonia's reason for being, they say, in their reason for being, this is their mission, we know that our products harm the planet. That's right up there, like in maybe the third paragraph of their reason for being. And that is why Patagonia has the largest recycle and repair facility of any apparel company. A couple of Christmases ago, their CEO announced, please don't buy any of our products, you have enough clothes. Use the clothes you have. They are doing recycling to the point with other people in the apparel industry to recycle at the thread level because 85% of post-use clothes, I donate my clothes, trust me, where they're going to go is the landfill. 85% of post-use clothes go into landfills, and they don't degrade, or at least they don't degrade quickly. So they're developing, as part of their inherent negative, again, the more clothes they sell, the more they can contribute to landfill. They're looking at how can you unwind a piece of used clothing and make something new. That's innovation, but those are all examples of the value of knowing your inherent negatives and taking action to mitigate them. In the case of Jewel, one of the things with Jewel that you discover with social media, and this gets into Facebook, the whole MO of technology up until this point has been build, scale, and worry about the social consequence later. We're now beginning to understand the consequence of that. And I can tell you that the people that are advancing artificial intelligence and driverless cars are waking up to that and paying attention to it, because that no longer works. So what's the positive side of that? There's also part, to get the rest of that circle after you've mitigated your negatives, is to now look for shared solutions. So let me give you a couple examples, because this isn't just the negative. If you're Blue Cross Blue Shield, you have a wealth of information that's very private, so you need to make sure that it's good private information. But they've established a medical institute to look at the social determinants of health. So one of their theories is that one of the barriers to health is access to your doctor and access to prescriptions. And what they mean by access is just physically getting there. So they've got a partnership with Lyft that's part of their policy. And they will reimburse. You don't have to pay for Lyft if you needed to get to the doctor, because they know that that can make a healthier subscriber. And by the way, a healthier subscriber is great for business for Blue Cross Blue Shield. If you are Unilever, in addition to all the things that they've been doing in terms of reducing their inherent negatives, they are designing products from the start that consume less natural resource. So for example, they invented dry shampoo to be used occasionally between, so you use less water. They've invented new kinds of laundry detergents that, especially for developed worlds that are less developed worlds, that require you to lose less water. I've already told you about Patagonia, but let me talk a little bit about waste management, and then I'll move on, because I know I'm standing between you and food. Waste management is also something that is in Reset. Their CEO had a meeting in 2011, and we're talking to their customers. Their customers said, I would need some help on how to reduce our waste. And he's thinking, that's not the best news for somebody whose business model depends on people creating waste. Instead, what they said, I've got a core competency. I know how to manage waste. And so they added to their business complement the consulting on how their customers could reduce their waste. Their stock doubled between 2012 and 2016 because they saw the potential of both a shared solution and a shared advocacy. It's a wonderful story. Nike, of course, changed their whole, they changed the apparel industry and the way clothes are sourced. Way back when, sometimes you need a whack on the side of the head to get religion on how you ought to change. But if you recall, this was third world labor and using not good manufacturing places to build your products. So the bottom line of all of this that I will leave you with is that the new age for your narrative is that rather than philanthropy, business has a direct stake in a stable society, in an institute that predictably work. Business cannot succeed in a failed society. In the old days, the Martin Friedman part of the world is your business is to make money, which is true. You cannot have a sustainable business if you can't have a profitable business. But that doesn't mean it's an either or. It can be a both and. What has changed in this new landscape is has not changed is the need to be profitable. What has changed is a web-enabled stakeholder vigilance for how that profit is made. And that will never turn back. This, in fact, is a whole new era for business. So I'm open to questions, and I think I got us back on time. I'm rather proud of myself. Questions or challenges on this? Irresponsible? Okay, if you didn't hear it, the question is, who are the bad guys? who are not getting this or generally don't care? Unfortunately for my friends in the social media industry, I think Facebook is still struggling. And in part, I think it's because of the governance. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has the controlling share. I've talked to them and they said, if you were me, what would we do? Not Mark, obviously, hardly in a front name with him. But I learned, I worked in the chemical industry for a long time. And the chemical industry, after Bhopal, learned a lesson the hard way, but learned a lesson that if you are at the table with the regulators, you can make a much safer business operation. By the way, you now have a level playing field because everybody has to play by the same rules. Regulations aren't terrible. They can be incredibly helpful. I don't see the social media people yet getting to that point because frankly, they don't have to. We'll see if the public begins to shift where they're going to go. But I do see others that have, so that's one example of people who are not getting it right. Juul is clearly an example, and I don't know if they're going to, I don't know how they deal with the after thing. I mean, it's one thing to change and now make it more, because it's not regulated, so they don't have the benefit like alcohol of you can prevent people. They've got to take extraordinary steps because they're not regulated. If I were they, I would want to be regulated for the very same reason I've said. But this whole notion of the people that don't get it right are the people that are not regulated and can run as fast as they can, and in this case, build scale. And it's interesting that that Altria bought a 30% stake, I think, in Juul now. And I can tell you that the employees who signed up for something that they thought was mission, that was exciting, to help people quit smoking, they're going to have a retention problem because of that in the next generation. So the other thing I would tell you is there's just what Washington, D.C. needs is another new think tank. But they don't say they're a think tank. April 11th will be the launch of the Washington Institute for Business, Society, and Government. And I have the honor to be on their advisory board. But what they are doing is realizing that government systems that can help control this and be part of the solution for common good are failing. So what they're trying to be is a convener of business, society, and government to come forward, especially on new technologies, to understand how can we get this right to begin with after the examples of Facebook and some of the other new media. That there's got to be a better way than there is right now. Yeah.
How do you think we can improve or encourage them to improve businesses that are like big pharma, that you have to have what they're producing no matter what? So they, can charge whatever they want in many cases. I saw, your inherent negatives, they pretty much hit every single one of them at some point or another. And I'm wondering how, we can make a shift, or they can make a shift in that industry.
Yeah, that's what I don't know whether the Institute's going to take this on, but it's a really pressing problem right now. My private belief, and I'm the daughter of a biochemist who worked for what was Sandoz, or I've forgotten what, they got acquired so much I've even forgotten what company it was at the time. But I kind of grew up in that industry. The fact of the matter is the profits for pharmaceutical companies in the U.S., which far outstrip profits elsewhere, is in fact the feeder stock into the R&D needed to develop these products. The question will be, I think, is as healthcare gets changed, and it's been changed a little bit, I mean healthcare in terms of insurance and things like that, as the price of drugs gets changed in America, which I think it will because there's enough of a groundswell going, the pharmaceutical industry is going to have their own come to Jesus moment. I mean, the business model they've had, I don't believe is going to be sustained as it was. That said, they need profits. All of us need them to have those profits to develop the products they have. One of the reasons that I became a Batten Fellow at Darden and we developed this concept called inherent negatives is I went through the silicone breast implant controversy at Dow Corning, which occupied more than a decade. And I was determined to say, how could we see it coming? Right? And that's why we developed this thing. But the other thing that I came to the conclusion is that you cannot communicate around a bad business strategy. That's not a messaging task. That has changed the strategy and changed the actions. And I think increasingly, in fact, in Reset, there's 2 chapters about the whole thing on breast implants and what we learned, as well as another one we did on the healthcare, which was on the health services side. And part of that is understanding what are the constructive actions a company has to take to make it right. When I was in the breast implant issue, I remember I was at a press conference. I mean, I've been on every television show there is and Dateline and whatever. Our CEO was at a podium, and there were so many microphones. This is at the National Press Club. He couldn't even put his paper down. That is how much media coverage we had. But I watched we went through 3 CEOs. Sometimes you got to keep getting it right. And I watched this guy and his leadership, and I've got a whole chapter on that in Reset. And what he taught me was that this is not a communication issue. This is what is our responsibility, in this case breast implants, to the women who have our implants, and the need to say what are the actions, and I call them constructive actions you're going to take in order to make things right. If you're a lawyer, you don't want to say corrective action because that implies you did something wrong, God forbid. So I call it constructive actions. But I watched him announce a platform at that time, and he and I were together on this one. One platform was we were getting out of the breast implant business, okay? But we still had women who had breast implants. So the next platform was we will provide financial support for any woman who wants to have her implants removed and does not have the financial means to do so. So in other words, the person who might have been harmed. And I met with him, and I got the lead plaintiffs in the case, and the 3 of us met and hammered out the terms of that program. It was the actions taken. The last one was we will fund additional research on breast implants, and we will make sure it's published in peer-reviewed literature. It won't be proprietary. I watched that whole issue stop. I was getting 5,000 media inquiries a day. Stopped the next day. Because me at the table, a CEO that knew what he was doing, put together the solutions of action. A company's character, a company's action is the authentic content for its character. And until you get that actions right, the actions become the content of your message. And that's the answer that you have to do. You do it with other people. You are not the sole seer of all good. But you have people at the table who know what are the constructive actions you can take. The companies who do it right, let me say it that way, the companies who do it right. First, look at the Mayo Clinic. I'll give you an example of Mayo Clinic. They are kind of an engineering group themselves. They're medical. And when Trump had the travel ban, a lot of their patients, their relatives, and their doctors were being banned from coming to the Mayo Clinic. They could not have that. So they had to take a stand, but the difference was that was at the heart of their business. They had to take a stand. Their employees required. What they did was now they have got a matrix where they say, how do I evaluate the political stand on whether I should take it or not? And they go through, how is it aligned to our values? Do we have a credible voice? Could we be a credible, even a credible voice on this issue? How does it affect our business practices? What is our employees' attitudes toward it? And they do all of that. They even have it weighted as only really engineering, and they come up with a number. But that number then guides the conversation. It doesn't decide for them. And it produces a very good set of trade-offs, because one of the things you will find very quickly is that your employees have just as diverse view as the public. And if you take a political stand that's point A, because some employees have stood up and say, we ought to take a stand, you just haven't heard from the other employees yet who say, how dare you? That's just the nature. So it better be rooted in something that's key to your business, then you can take a stand. Okay, I think my time's up. Thank you.